The fragrance of selfless love that has drawn the world into one family. The truth of an eternal message that has been revealed through every act and word. The fulfillment in service that has been taught by relentless sacrifice. The Lord's own life is indeed His message.
Sai Ram. Greetings and welcome to the 24th episode of our ongoing series entitled The Message of the Lord. If you recall, in the previous episode, we ended with a call from Bhagwan Baba asking us to place a ceiling on our desires. Today, we wish to pursue that topic. Now, why does Swami place so much emphasis on ceiling on desires? 3 reasons. Firstly, it is good for us as the body, mind and soul. Secondly, it is good for society as a whole. And thirdly, it is good for nature too. How? This is what we shall examine in this episode.
Let us start with the word desire. What exactly does it mean? The dictionary says desire means to want, crave and long for something we would like to have. That something may be the satiation of a want connected with the senses, such as eating ice cream, for example. It could also be something purely mental, like wanting to have political, financial, or even sheer muscle power. Why does such a craving arise in the first place? Swami says, basically it is all because the individual thinks that by satisfying the particular wish, he or she, as the case may be, would feel happy.
కాలు మొదలు తల వరకు కూడాను కోరికల చేతనే కాలమును గడుపుతూ వస్తున్నాడు.
Man today is spending his time full of desires from top to toe.
కోరికలు తీరటం ఆనందమని భావిస్తున్నాడు. కాదు కాదు.
He feels so happy if these desires are fulfilled, but certainly not.
కోరికలు ఆరటమే ఆనందమనేటువంటి సత్యాన్ని గుర్తించాలి.
Desireless state confers the true bliss.
ఏనాడు మానవుని యొక్క హృదయంలో కోరికలు ఆరునో ఆనాడే తన కోరికలు తీరినటువంటి వాడవుతాడు.
The day when the desires are given up and pacified, you can aspire to be blissful.
ప్రేమ స్వరూపులారా,
embodiments of love.
యుగములు గడిచినప్పటికీ జగమును కదిలినప్పటికీ మానవుని యొక్క హృదయము మారటం లేదు.
Though ages have passed, generations have left, human heart has not yet been transformed.
So you see, deep within, it is the person's quest for happiness that triggers desires. Is it wrong to want to be happy? Not at all, says Swami. He adds, your nature itself is bliss. So who can object to your wanting to be happy?
If I'm allowed to be happy, if I can have desires, then why is Swami asking me to put a ceiling on my desires? Is he asking me to put a ceiling on my happiness?
Definitely not. And it is in that confusion about what exactly happiness means that all problems arise. Let us try to work our way through that confusion slowly and in small steps. First and foremost, we must be aware that happiness can be sought both via the head and the heart. Seeking happiness via the head essentially means seeking happiness in the external world, and it is here that the body, the senses and the mind play the role of active agents. There are many ways by which the senses and the mind can deliver happiness, and shortly we shall examine some of them. But before we get into all those details, there is one thing Swami says about seeking happiness in the world that we must pay careful attention to. Oh man, you want happiness. Fine. Now, do you want temporary happiness or permanent happiness? I am sure you want permanent happiness, right? Well, in that case, don't you think you are making a terrible mistake by looking for permanent happiness in a world that is itself temporary? Don't you think your approach is fundamentally flawed? Now, if we try to present this argument, many people would counter this and say,
"Stop being smart, mister. You know, this planet Earth has lasted for thousands of years and it is going to be around for any number of years. And I'm here only for just 50, 60 years. On that scale, the world is permanent enough for me. I mean, all this talk about the world being temporary, ephemeral and all that just doesn't wash."
That might be a clever counter-argument, but just pause to reflect on how such false logic can trap a person and lead to all kinds of problems. The fundamental point is simply this: God has created the world in such a manner that it is a tight mixture of opposites. That is to say, in this world, pleasure and pain, joy and sorrow, happiness and misery are strongly tied together and cannot ever be separated. To put it simply, they are like two sides of the same coin. Can you ever have a coin with just one side? It is as simple as that. Thus, pleasure can turn to pain in a moment. As we very well know, this happens in sports all the time. There are so many examples of this kind one can give. So, the first thing we learn is that permanent happiness is never possible in the world because the world is intrinsically dual. Temporary happiness? Sure. Permanent happiness? Never. In spite of this fact, people do many things without thinking about the fact that what they are indulging in would in the long run be harmful to them. Often, it may not seem that way. However, the actions of the individual could affect society as a whole, especially when millions do the same sort of thing. And when something harms society, it also affects individuals. That may sound rather complicated, but here is what we mean. Take cars. When Henry Ford introduced mass production and made it possible for even ordinary Americans to buy a car, it was considered a tremendous blessing. People in America suddenly felt a new sense of freedom. They had cars, oil was cheap, and they could now easily travel all across America. It was not long before people elsewhere wanted to do the same. First, it was people in Europe. Then it was the turn of Japan, China, and South Korea to get into the auto club. And now, even in India, the roads are full of traffic. In fact, even in Puttaparthi, where once there were just a few bullock carts, today there is so much traffic. You may say, okay, so what? Well, with hundreds of millions of cars on the roads of the world every single day, just look at the amount of carbon dioxide that is getting dumped into the atmosphere. And that, believe it or not, is leading to a change in the climate of our entire planet. Since climate change is so much in the news, we shall not say anything further. The point to remember is, although the desire of one particular individual might not affect many, when hundreds of thousands and even millions begin to have the same desire within the same span of time, then the cumulative effect can be quite serious. Here is a different example, that of eating fast food recklessly, consuming soft drinks endlessly, and eating chocolates, various other sweets and potato chips without limit. We know what happens as a result of all this: obesity, diabetes, heart problems, etc. Currently, all these are beginning to become a serious problem not only in America, but indeed all over the world. By the way, we should understand that often one mass problem leads to many others. For example, when the auto industry multiplied hugely and millions of cars began to be sold every year in America, auto junk soon became a problem. Thus, when consumerism increases exponentially, as is the case now, waste creation also increases sharply. That raises huge problems concerning waste disposal, and industry has resorted to many methods. The first is to ship all junk to the poor countries, where poor people risk their lives to dismantle junk, exposing themselves to danger from hazardous materials like mercury, cadmium, asbestos, etc. All these are risky propositions. In other words, poor people somewhere risk their lives to deal with the junk created somewhere else by people who could afford to indulge in consumerism. What about junk food? That also has consequences beyond health problems. Take hamburgers. The main ingredient is beef. Beef is obtained from cows, and cows have to be bred and reared. That means they have to be fed a lot of food. The bottom line is that if it takes about 2,000 liters of water to produce 1 kilo of wheat, it takes 15,000 liters of water to produce 1 kilo of beef. See the enormous difference in the water consumption? Just think, if half the population of the world turn active beef eaters, that is about 3 billion, instead of the 600 to 700 millions today. And imagine what the situation would be in 2050 when the world population is expected to touch 9 billion. During the last few decades, people have been made to believe that consumerism is a must if humanity is to survive, and that without consumerism, the economy would collapse, people would starve, terrible things would happen, etc. Not many realize that this mantra is a creation of powerful market forces. A mantra that everyone is made to believe because without people consuming like mad, even if they have to borrow heavily, big corporations cannot make fat profits. The fact of the matter is that people have been deluded into believing that endless and exponentially growing consumerism is a must, and that without it, humanity and civilization would come to a grinding halt. Nobody pauses for a moment and asks, "Hey, wait a minute. How is endless consumption possible in a finite world, especially one where the population is growing exponentially?" As a matter of fact, way back in the 80s, a group of scientists known as the Club of Rome did examine this question because they were alarmed that humanity was beginning to use up heavily non-renewable resources like oil so fast that a crash of some sort might occur. This is what they projected. To start with, there are two facts. One, population growth, and two, depletion of non-renewable resources. Put them together, trouble now starts. Industrial output grows initially to keep pace with growing population, but soon starts coming down since a resource crunch begins to have an impact. Food production also grows at first, but later begins to decline. Meanwhile, pollution also increases. And now the negative effects begin to act. Food production goes down and the population also begins to decline, even as resources become more and more scarce. What that means is a rapid decline in standard of living, a fact that would hit the rich countries much more than the poor countries. When these predictions were first published, they created a great stir. But soon people began to say, "Listen, all this is nothing but scaremongering and doomsday forecasts. Nothing like this is ever going to happen." But you know what? Maybe the Club of Rome forecasts did not work out exactly because the model on which it was based had some weak assumptions. However, this much is true. Take freshwater availability. If you carefully examine the situation, it is far from comfortable. Consider these facts. To start with, we note that roughly about 1,400 million cubic kilometers of water are available on the face of planet Earth. That sure might look like a lot of water, but 97.5% of all that water is in the oceans. So, straight away, that tells us that only about 2.5% of 1,400 cubic kilometers or 35 million cubic kilometers of fresh water is available for humans, plants, animals, etc. That still might seem a lot, but hold on for a minute. About 90% of this 2.5% is locked up as ice in the Arctic and the Antarctic, so it is simply not available to us. Thus, out of the 35 million cubic kilometers that we thought we had, we actually have only 3.5 million cubic kilometers. You might say, listen, 3.5 million cubic kilometers is still a lot of water. What's all this fuss one is making? Hold on please. Even all the water we are supposed to have is not readily available. If we consider water sources from which humans could easily draw water for their use, such as rivers, lakes, easily accessible groundwater, then 3.5 million cubic kilometers comes down to about 93,000 cubic kilometers. Used as we are to waters in rivers, lakes, etc., which are not all that big, even this might seem like a lot of water. So it might, till we take a look at the way and the rate at which we are using water, wasting water, polluting water. At the beginning of the 20th century, that is to say, in the year 1900, humans were consuming about 300 cubic kilometers of water per year. By the year 2000, the consumption rate had gone up to 2,100 cubic kilometers per year. Given the rate at which consumption is increasing, it is estimated that by the year 2025, we may use up about 75% of the available bank balance. Now, isn't that scary? You might wonder, there is something funny going on here. Human population is no doubt increasing, but surely they cannot be drinking up all that water. Where is all that water disappearing? That is a very good question, but there is also an answer. Let us start with the caveman. He needed water only for drinking and washing, that is, if he took baths. Perhaps he did once in a while. About 10,000 years ago, humans learned to cultivate crops, that is to say, they began to practice agriculture. This straightaway increased water consumption. Historical records show that in major river deltas like that of the Nile, the Tigris and the Indus, people had canal systems to engage extensively in agriculture. Today, of course, agriculture uses a lot of water throughout the world. Next, take industry. You might not believe it, but an industry like steel manufacturing consumes a lot of water. In fact, the silicon industry that gives us computer and cell phone chips consumes a lot of water. Then there are the utilities like railway stations, airports, hotels, resort areas, golf courses, all of which guzzle water. Building construction consumes a lot of water. Think of how much building, highway and dam construction is going on in the world today. By the way, let us not forget pollution, large-scale pollution of water, that is. For example, River Ganges is held to be very sacred in India. And yet, the river is polluted all the time without anyone batting an eyelid. Imagine that. That is what Baba refers to as spiritual blindness. Now, maybe one can understand why he wants us to venerate nature as God.
ప్రాచీనులు చేస్తున్నటువంటి యొక్క ఈ ఆరాధనలన్నీ కూడా పవిత్రమైనటువంటివి.
All modes of worship by the ancients are sacred.
ఏదో ఒక తుచ్చమైనటువంటి దానికోసమని ఉత్తమమైనటువంటి దాన్ని నిర్మాణం చేసుకొని దానికంతా మనం ఆరాధన చేస్తున్నాము.
And in fact, for mean low things we forget this point.
వద్దు వద్దు.
We should not
ప్రకృతి మన భూమాత.
And its mother earth.
ఈ భూమాత గోమాత.
And also the cow is revered as mother.
వేదమాత.
And scripture is mother.
కన్నమాత.
And physical mother.
ఈ నలుగురు మదర్లే మనకు నిజమైనటువంటి యొక్క ఆరాధన దేవతలు.
These four forms of mother have got to be revered.
అట్టి మాతలను మనం రక్షించుకుంటూ వారిని సంతృప్తి పరిచేటువంటి నిమిత్తమై మనం సరైన సాధనలు చేస్తూ రావాలి.
We have to respect and worship the mother, the physical mother, the cow the mother, the scripture is mother.
దైవారాధన చాలా ముఖ్యము.
And worshipping of God is most
దైవారాధన అనేటువంటి సన్నగిల్లి పోవడం చేతనే
because there is no worship or thinking of the Lord.
ప్రపంచంలో అనేక దుఃఖములంతా పెరుగుతూ వస్తున్నాయి.
We find the whole world is in chaos.
ఎక్కడ చూసినా దుఃఖమే.
We find misery.
కారణం ఏమిటి?
Why?
ఆత్మవిశ్వాసాన్ని.
The point being made is simply the following. The predictions of the Club of Rome might not be quantitatively correct, but the trends they have predicted are correct. Let's now get back to where we started, which was about sealing on desires. People begin to consume because they have desires. The desire might not necessarily be a bad one, but as they say, even a good thing in excess can sometimes lead to undesirable problems. That's right. The body needs vitamins, but that does not mean one takes vitamins in excess. Thus, even from a purely physical point of view, a sealing on desires is good for the individual, for society, and for the ecosystem on which we depend so much. However, Swami wants us to practice sealing on desires for a more important reason. If you recall, a person gives in to desires so as to be happy. However, worldly desires do not make one completely happy. They can and do make a person suffer sometimes, especially when the indulgence in desires is excessive. What then is the alternative? Swami has clearly explained that. As he often says, happiness is union with God. How does one become united with God? There are some simple things we need to do. Firstly, we must get rid of bad habits, including talking too much, eating too much, sleeping too much, gossiping, wasting too much time watching TV, chatting excessively on the phone, wasting time on the internet, and so on. So, what must we do instead? Baba has clearly indicated that also. He says, first and foremost, control your desires. Second, lead a disciplined life in every respect. That is, not only food and personal habits, but also in the matter of spending money, time and energy. Third, do not waste anything. Next, try to help others in a selfless manner whenever you can. Further, whenever you are doing some routine work like ironing, say, keep chanting the name of God, any name you like. Above all, try and see God in all beings. That would make you a kind person who always helps and never hurts. Now all that is not very difficult, is it? You know, truly speaking, God is way above us. But when He comes down as an avatar, He really comes down to our level in every respect. And that is why He makes His teachings so simple. That is how compassionate Swami is always. And yet, somehow people do not make the effort they really should to put all that He constantly says into serious practice. There are so many devotees of Baba all over the world. Just imagine how much the world would change if each and every one of us would try to follow Swami's teachings. In Puttaparthi, it is a common sight to see people running behind Swami's car.
How much better it would be if people followed Swami's teachings with the same energy and vigor. Please don't get us wrong here. We are not criticizing people who run behind Swami's car. In fact, we do it all the time, and it is only our love for Him that makes us want to see Him anywhere and anytime. But then, how about writing His teachings on our heart and following them? Swami sends us a silent message. He says, if you follow my teachings, you need not run behind me. I shall run behind you wherever you go. What a wonderful deal that is. Let's make the best of this deal. We hope you enjoyed this presentation and do join us tomorrow for the next episode. Till then, Jai Sai Ram.